Hello, my name is Sadia Ahmed and I'm the Public Programs Coordinator at Gail Borden Public Library. I'd like to thank you for watching this program on the history of Walton Island, which was provided to us by the Elgin History Museum and presented by Mr. Alan Walters. Before we begin, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Mr. Walters. He joined the Board of Directors in 2013 and served 2 years as Vice President. He is currently now the President of the Elgin History Museum. He is a lifelong resident of Elgin. He graduated from Larkin High School in 1971 and Western Illinois University in 1975 with a teaching certificate in history. Walton Island was a favorite city park in Alan's childhood, and he took the task of researching this amazing river island as part of the Elgin Parks and Recreation Foundation Golden Memories program. So now I'd like to invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy the program. And I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Walters.
Well, thank you, Sadia. And on behalf of the Elgin History Museum, we're certainly thrilled to be able to partner once again with the Gail Borden Public Library. We enjoy doing things together and explore our common interest in the history of Elgin. I think you'll find over the next hour that our discussion of Walton Island is pretty interesting. Like so many places and events in Elgin's history, Walton Island has a story to tell. And I'm certainly glad to have been the one to do some research and to tell the story. So let's get on with it. And I thought as a way of starting, let's get some of the basics out of the way about Walton Island, and we'll do it in the form of a trivia question, or a number of trivia questions. So we'll run through these rather quickly. First of all, I'd ask how many islands are there? And you can see your choices are 0, 1, 2, or 3. It's a bit of a trick question in that the answer really is all of the above. We have maps down at the museum that show very clearly down through the years there's been 1 island. Most of us know that today there are 2 islands there. That'd be the most correct answer. We have 1 or 2 maps that do show 3 islands there. And we also know from time to time when the river's angry, it overruns the island and there could be no islands there, particularly in the early days when it was barely above water and at low water times. Are the islands naturally occurring, man-made, or both? Well, that's another bit of a trick question. The answer really is both. As we'll see when we get a little further down the road here, the original island or islands weren't much. They were just mud flats, barely sticking out of the water. And of course, to get to the island in its current state today, an awful lot of man-made work was done to raise the island up and protect it. How big are the islands? Your choices are 2, 4, 6, or 8 acres. That one may be a bit of a stumper. The actual answer is 4 acres. Approximately the northern island is about 1 acre and the southern island is about 3 acres. Together they make 4. So by the way, do we properly call them Walton Island or Walton Islands? You hear both, of course. Well, Dave Gathman, writing in the Courier News, concluded that Walton Island in the singular is the correct terminology before 1992, but generally after 1992, it's termed Walton Islands. I do not know what is magic about 1992. That's just David's conclusion. But old-time Elginites like me seem to prefer the term Walton Island in the singular. So from whom did they derive their name? Again, multiple choice: Sam Walton, Izaak Walton, Walton Schmidt, or Grandpa Walton. Well, that should be pretty much an easy one for any Elginite. Of course, it's Izaak Walton. And we'll learn a little bit more about Izaak Walton a couple slides down the road here and why his name is attached to our island. Did the islands ever have individual names? Well, yes, strangely enough. Once upon a time, the North Island was called North or Northerly Island. Not terribly creative, but that name fell into out of general use by the 1930s, and Walton Island covers the both of them now. The city, in fact, decided in 1938 that having two islands with separate names was just too confusing for Elginites, so Walton Island would be the one used collectively. Now, that's the end of the trivia piece. Before we get into the actual history, I just want you to take a look at this slide for a minute. This is the reoccurring themes that I uncovered doing this work. This cycle occurs several times through the 20th century, and it goes like this. Walton Island is largely ignored by the city. Periodic civic pressure mounts to improve the island, to make it a park, to open it back up. Much energy is then expended, usually on a volunteer basis, to get the island open. And there's great public interest once the island is open. And then the island falls into disrepair, becomes a haven for vagrants. The city closes it to the public. And then once again, the city can do what it prefers to do, and that's ignore Walton Island. So let's dial the clock back to some of the early maps that we have at the Elgin History Museum. I've got a couple of them here on the screen. We have maps that were produced in 1855 and 1860 and 72 and 86, 92 and 95. And these maps all show one island, as you can see highlighted here. We do have an 1880 map that shows two islands, but really the island was never much more than a mud flat with a scrub brush growing on it. And in fact, it would disappear in times of high water. Now, if you look at these two maps, I've encircled in red Walton Island, and you can see it's up near the Kimball Street Dam, especially in the 1895 map. Most of you will notice that there's a southern island that would appear to be down near where National Street is. And in fact, that is called Gough Island, and that is the National Street Bridge in the 1895 map that's crossing the island. If you look closely right here at the bottom right-hand corner, that is the original watch factory building. One may ask what happened to Gough Island, and it went away. Nature has a way of erasing islands through erosion. In fact, Walton Island works hard to maintain itself through anti-erosion procedures, practices, but Gough Island has disappeared over the years. Really, the island, and it's not called Walton Island at this time, but the island first shows up in print around 1895 or so, 1891. Mike Alf reports that in the early days, small boys would wade out to the island and work to catch fish. And East Side and West Side boys would stage fights, in quotation marks, fights, for its possession when it did appear above surface at times of low water. Newspaper story in the fall, in October of 1891, talks of a Mrs. Dora Miller. Now, Mrs. Dora Miller claims that she owns the island and she intends to raise bees on the island. Now, Mrs. Miller does live adjacent to the island on the eastern shore, and an Elgin official observing her setting up her beekeeping operation tells her to leave it alone, that the United States government owns the island and she surely doesn't. Elgin is only the custodian of the island, and he warns her to stay off it. Mrs. Miller claims that she bought the island from a squatter 5 years before, and that squatter had bought it from the United States government. The article in the paper concludes that this may have to be decided in federal court in Chicago. Now, I can see no record of it being reported as going to court. Perhaps Mrs. Miller backed off. Clearly, she did not own the island. The island is owned at that time by the federal government. Here's just a couple more shots of the island. You can see it's not very much. So this brings us back to really, who is Izaak Walton, the Izaak Walton League, and what is he doing on our island? Well, the Izaak Walton League is named after the gentleman Izaak Walton, who lived from 1593 to 1683. He was an English nobleman and often considered the world's first conservationist. He linked conservation with outdoor recreation in his book, The Complete Angler. It's said that he fished until he was aged 83, showing his significance in the English nobility. He's buried in Winchester Cathedral. Now, the Izaak Walton League was formed in Chicago in 1922 with 400 charter members. And of course, they were dedicated to conservation and really were an early conservation organization in the United States. They now have 40,000 members nationwide. The Elgin chapter was formed in 1931 with 84 members, grew to be as large as 400 members, now has about 80 members in their group today. Really being formed in the 1920s, the Ikes, as they call themselves, and I'll call them the Ikes from here on out, the Ikes can claim to be among the next generation of leaders in the early conservation movement. We know from history that the likes of Teddy Roosevelt and John Audubon and John Muir were really the first generation leaders, and the Ikes were close behind. They do have a mission statement, and that's to conserve, restore, and promote the sustainable use and enjoyment of our natural resources, including soil, air, woods, water, and wildlife. And really in the aftermath of the Industrial Revolution, when progress and pollution were the order of the day, the Ikes really were ahead of their time in their interest in ecology. As early as the 1930s, they were stocking fish in the Fox River. Although that really doesn't yet explain why their names attached to the island. But as we take a look at the island in the 20s and 30s and 40s, we'll close that circle. 1928, the city and the state agreed to define the banks of the river between Kimball and National Streets. By defining the banks, they mean really straightening out the river and rising up the banks as a way to prevent flooding and really just making them more defined. The U.S. Corps of Engineers has to approve. And the city even talks of this time of taking the island out completely just to enhance the channel and to prevent ice jams. Among one of the first projects cited by the Elgin Ikes is the development of the island. The Ikes want to enlarge the island and make it a public park. They see the island as an asset for the city, a good place to fish, and a possible location for their clubhouse. And they propose dredging the river to build up the island. So gradually during this point in the 1930s, because of the Izaak Walton League's interest in the island, it adopts Walton Island as their name. In March of 1933, the U.S. War Department and the state of Illinois give the Ikes the permits they need to improve the islands for a public park. River stone retaining walls are going to be built to protect the islands from erosion. And the Ikes hope to place a cabin, a clubhouse, a meeting place, if you will, on the island. And they know they'll have to build some bridging out to the island as well. The cabin or the meeting house is never done. Now, in August of 1933, construction is started. And also the Walton Island Fund is created. Donations are taken at Keeney's Drugstore in downtown Elgin. And the funds are to be used for operating the machinery that'll do the dredging. And the funds are rolling in. There's reports that Benjamin Pearsall gave $30, that the Bungay Service Station donated $25, and even two gentlemen named Paul Lee and H. Greenberg each donated $2. The Ikes, in fact, are donating the labor themselves, and they anticipate that Elginites who are on the relief rolls will come and donate their services and their labor. Now, remember, this is the height of the Depression, and a large number of folks are out of work. So the thought of these people who are being, paid on unemployment, if you will, that they would come down and donate their work and help out. The job's going to feature an old Ford engine that will be driving the dredging work. But really, this is a job that's a lot of hand shovel work. The Ike's secretary at the time, Earl Gromer, is quoted as saying, when completed, the islands will be landscaped with plantings of various varieties of trees and flowers. It will serve as a bird sanctuary, numerous birdhouses having already been tendered for placement on the island. And work is going to proceed slowly through 33 and 34 and 35. Title to the island does pass from the United States government to Elgin in 1934. And it's hoped that a dedication could be held in the summer of 1937. Now this picture and the one before it actually shows the connector bridge that was built during this time, connecting Northerly Island to the larger southern island. Now, it may be that the Ikes bit off more than they could chew here. This was going to be a big task. And by November 1935, work is now transferred from the Ikes to the Works Progress Administration. And this starts under a $27,325 grant from the United States government. Now, the Works Progress Administration, WPA, is one of those alphabet soup organizations that Franklin Roosevelt created to fight the Depression. I know you're more familiar probably with the CCC and the Public Works Administration and any number of them, TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority, any number of these alphabet soups. The CCC is known for doing conservation and ecological work in rural America. The Works Progress Administration was really doing the same thing in the urban environment. So for them to work on the island here in downtown Elgin would be very much part of their mission. Now in January of 1936, we now have an 80-foot steel trestle bridge linking the northern island to the eastern shore. And work was started and completed in just several days. A much bigger project is work is continuing on the Chicago Street Bridge Peninsula runway, and that's the picture you're looking at on the screen now. A similar steel trestle bridge is planned that'll connect the runway with the bridge. Now, you heard me say Chicago Street Bridge, and you're thinking, no, he must mean the Highland Avenue Bridge. Well, in 1936, the Highland Street Bridge was not yet thought about, certainly not completed. The nearest bridge crossing the river was Chicago Street. So that peninsula had to be dredged and inched all the way down to Chicago Street, an extra city block. Now in April 1936, work shuts down for several weeks. They're out of money. But a new grant for $9,375 is garnered. It's thought that 3 months will be needed to finish the work. And the last tasks to be done include sodding, shoreline rip-wrapping. Rip-wrapping is a term for brick reinforcing the shoreline to prevent erosion. They do need to complete the Chicago Street Bridge link. There'll be more river dredging. And an American flag is to be installed on the North Island, and old-time Elginites will remember the American flag. Now, in November of 1936, Trygve Rovelstad's cement flag sculpture / painting is dedicated, and is dedicated on Armistice Day in November of 36. Now, who was Trygve Rovelstad? Well, he was an Elgin-based sculptor and artist, and he designed the flag. Now, the picture on the left is actually a 1963 picture of a refurbishment done of the flag. I included it here because a little closer up, a little better picture. The picture on the right probably is from the dedication day. It looks like it was just finished. There's still a ladder standing beside the monument. And you see that the sculpture aspect of the cement flag is the waving, the texture of it that makes the flag look like it is waving. And of course, it's a 48-star flag based at that point. At the dedication, Mayor Myron Lehman says, and this is a quote, "Here is the flag of our country. Safe within its folds is the freedom and liberty of our nation. I dedicate these colors to the everlasting purposes of our community, state, nation, our people, and our flag." Well, by the summer of 37, work is completed. Approximately $100,000 has been spent. The Elgin Windmill Company builds and installs the metal stairway down from the Chicago Street Bridge. The North Island is nicely landscaped. The South Island is still mostly weeds. The only shoreline bridge to island reaches from the eastern bank to the North Island. There is a wood bridge, connector bridge between the islands. It was thought between 60 and 100 WPA employed men worked from 1933 to 1938. 11,000 cubic yards of gravel had been dredged up from the riverbed. Combined, the island area is now 4 acres. Brick paths have been laid using old bricks that were torn up from city streets. The shoreline's been rip-wrapped and trees have been planted. So now we have an actual island dedication. The one the year before was a dedication for the flag. This is the dedication for the island as a whole. Dr. Preston Bradley, a nationally known orator and a preacher at a Chicago church, is the principal speaker. But the quote I lifted out of the paper that day was from State Representative John C. Friedland. And he says, here in the very heart of the city, accessible to all, we have a place where children can play in a beautiful rustic playground, a place where organizations can picnic, and a spot where everyone can commune with themselves in restful surroundings. Occasionally, the hum of industry can be heard. At times, a freight train will rumble noisily by. In 1938, another interesting quote from a visitor to the island. There were mothers with little children who eagerly raced over the paths and back and forth on the bridges. There were elderly people quietly gazing out at the rushing river. Young people promenaded together. A few stretched themselves out on the grass for a sunbath. Here and there, a fisherman tossed a line into the stream. I think, and I'm not sure young people promenade anymore, but I'm glad back in 1938 they could. Now, some post-dedication notes. By May of 1938, we see vandalism sneak in. Police are being asked to put a stop to vandalism on the island. Also in October of 1938, that's when the city decides that both islands should be named Walton Island because, as we said, it was just too confusing. August of 1940, the Chicago Street stairs are made wider to accommodate baby buggies. It seems that several mothers had complained the old stairs were too narrow to permit the baby buggies to come down. So we have a second set of stairs, and I only hope they made, or the mothers took the babies out of the buggies before they bounced them down the stairs. By 1943, the Highland Avenue Bridge is constructed. So we now have a third set of stairs because we'll make the approach not from Chicago Street, but we'll make the Highland Avenue Bridge be the south entrance. And so the new stairs descend down to the peninsula, and the Chicago Street stairs are removed. Post-World War II, the island is closed. Vagrants have certainly become a police problem. Around 1951, the park is just shut down because of vandalism. The paper reports that hobos, hoodlums, drunks, and degenerates begin to use it for shelter. There's even a story that nesting mallard ducks were being abused. So let's fast forward to the 1960s, and I've entitled this section, Let's Try Walton Island Improvements Again. Well, sort of. So in September '62, the park is reopened. It's got new park benches and picnic tables. No fishing is to be allowed. The only entrance is from the Highland Street Bridge, and that's because the Izaak Walton League WPA era bridge is gone. I do not know what happened to it, but it's gone at this point. So the only way is to come down the steps from Highland Avenue. The city announces the gate will be padlocked at dusk, and really Trygve Rovelstad's lighted flag sculpture is the only remnant of the original park. In June of '63, the island is open for fishing. City Manager Brunton and the police department object. The city council overrules and votes for a 1-month trial for fishing. June of 1963, the flag sculpture is repainted by American Legion pictures, American Legion members. So we see this picture again up close. Of course, by 1963, we are 50 states. We are not 48, but naturally they were repainted in the same original form with the 48 stars. But the island again is closed in the summer of 65 because of policing and maintenance issues. February of 66, the Ikes are back. The Ikes host a meeting of interested organizations willing to clean the riverfront and the island because everyone's aware that the new Civic Center is coming. And in March of 66, the city agrees to oversee civic organizations doing island cleanup. It's predicted this will take months. D Hill Nursery in Dundee volunteers to create a landscape plan. Work has started on tree and shrubbery removal, but really the job is never completed. Notice the city is volunteering to oversee. They're not offering any money. Really, to this point, the city's not spent any significant money on the island down through the history. Well, in February of 69, the island, and particularly the flag on the island, were a subject of a protest by about 20 high school students who proclaimed the island was a symbol of the faded spirit of Elgin. One sign even read, "A faded flag means a faded Elgin." Of course, this is right on the cusp of Earth Day and the ecology movement, conservation movement nationwide, starting up in 1970. So it's fitting that the high school students would be on the cutting edge of this. And high school students, let's face it, like to find something to protest once in a while. In response to the protest, Mayor Alf reports that the islands are due for a substantial rehabilitation within the next 2 years after the Civic Center is completed. The islands are listed as about 3 acres in size at this point, which means there's been some erosion. And in a weird proposal, the Elgin Association of Commerce and Industry wants to turn the island into a parking lot, no doubt to aid downtown Elgin shopping. About this time, Aubrey Neville of the Ikes, the Izaak Walton League, says the island would be a place for a pleasant respite during a day's work. And Mayor Alf says policing would be no problem if a bridge was built to the east bank, if they replaced that missing bridge. But March of 1969, the Elgin Park director terms the whole thing with Walton Island as unfeasible. But Mayor Alf says as soon as the Civic Center is completed in the fall, we plan on doing something with the old island. So now we move into the 1970s, and really the 1970s activity starts with the Larkin High School class of 69. In March of 69, Jan Rager, a Larkin High School senior student who's the chairman of their senior project activities, is quoted in the paper saying it's been explained to us that Walton Island is a forgotten place. We Larkin seniors cannot accept that explanation. Since when does a noon picnic spot on a shady lawn go out of style? Why must a potentially favorite spot in town become a memory of the past? And Leroy Clemens, writing in his Courier News for What It's Worth column, calls on the city to support the students. We are tired of the frequent statement that Walton Island was a trouble spot, that it could happen again, and that it cannot be policed if it is restored. There is a sad lack of imagination in that remark. So the class of 69 goes to work. They have a number of work days, the last one being June 11th in 69. They cut down dead trees, they clear out brush, they expose pathways, they mow grass. And the class of 69 also starts the Bridge the Gap Fund, and it hopes to collect $10,000 in which to finance a new bridge to the eastern shore. Now you can see that graphic on the left. That's the little graphic the Courier News ran on the front page every day during the campaign that showed the fund goal and the take in that day and how many dollars they had to go, how many dollars they'd collected. Picture on the right is 4 civic leaders handing a check to Jan Rager, who's standing in the center, making a donation. I think it's interesting that they are standing in front of what's left of the Izaak Walton Bridge to the eastern shore. It's really just a stone pillar and that concrete stairway. And of course, they're trying to replace that bridge. The city fathers during '69 do agree to open the island from July 4th to Labor Day based on the work the students had done. It'll be open from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. and warns Councilman William Rauschenberger, if the island is not treated right, it will be closed. In 1970, the island will reopen again for the summer season after some clearing and cleanup work is done by the city crews. By now, $5,000 has been collected by the Bridge to Gap Fund, begun by the students. And by the time they're done, they will collect nearly their $10,000 goal. A bit of a tragedy struck in September of 1970. The Trygve Rovelstad flag sculpture was broken into 3 pieces by flooding. And of course, it will ultimately have to be removed. September of 1970, the state of Illinois is holding up clearance for the bridge approval construction. There's something called the Stratton Plan being discussed, named after the current governor at the time, Bill Stratton. And the Stratton Plan called for a navigable Fox River from Ottawa all the way to Wisconsin. Meanwhile, there is $20,000 now in the bridge fund, and the bridge and the money is ready to go. Finally, the city and the state negotiate. They'll get a permit to build the bridge as long as the city promises to take the bridge down should the Stratton Plan goes forward. Obviously, a bridge of that nature would be a problem for navigation. But this being Illinois, there's never any money. The Stratton Plan was going to require millions of dollars, and it was never heard of again. So in June of 1971, a steel, concrete, and recycled bridge is proposed. This is a very early plastic recycling idea. It's thought that plastic would make the bridge lighter. The span would go from the eastern shore to the northerly island. About 30% of the sand required for the concrete mix would be replaced by the ground up plastic bottles. And what you see here on this slide, of course, is on the left is a individual college student, in fact, ECC student, putting the bottles into a grinding machine. And look at that sea of bottles that the student is sitting in on the right. Bob Hoffer, a local plastics manufacturer and a civic leader, says the plastic recycling plan will garner nationwide attention. After all, it's a very early example of plastic recycling instead of the burning of plastic or dumping into a landfill, which had been done up to this point. And queries come in from as far away as Alaska and Hawaii about how this plastic bridge is going to work. So we've got to, if we're going to grind up these bottles, we've got to have a drive to get the bottles. It's thought that 25,000 scrap plastic bottles will be needed. The Elgin High School joins in, and their students come up with a slogan aimed at the staff and other students. The slogan is, each one, bring one. Elginites would actually bring plastic items to a common place. The students at the ECC would grind the bottles into plastic flakes, and they do the work at the ECC Plastics Lab. By golly, in November of 1971, we have a groundbreaking for the bridge footings with many of the students present, including some of them from the class of '69, which of course have moved on to other things. Now the bridge would be built in 1 month through the month of November. And you can see from those pictures that that was a pretty steep little arch on that bridge. Now, I'm going to ask old-time Elginites if anybody remembers what happened to that bridge. And the answer is, it fell down. November 29th, as construction on the bridge is ending, the bridge collapses. 3 workers were on the bridge at the time. None were hurt. 1 worker was able to run off the bridge, and the other 2 were tossed into the water. I remind you, this is late November. That might have been a cold swim. The collapse came after a temporary support was removed in the center of the bridge. The contractor says the weight of the concrete might have been too much. But the bottom line is 80,000 pounds of concrete and 25,000 ground up plastic bottles are now in the river. A lot more queries about the plastic bridge come forth around the country, and Chicago newspapers run embarrassingly large pictures of the fallen bridge. Almost immediately, City Manager Robert Brunton says the plastic had nothing to do with it, but it's too early to draw any conclusions. Well, a third-party engineering firm is hired to determine the cause of the failure, and they come back with results that the failure was bad design and bad construction procedure. The analyst calls for a stronger design, better anchoring, says the contractor should have removed the center support first and then the quarter supports. They did it the other way around. They moved the quarter supports, which were the ones nearer each of the shores, and the last thing they did was take out the center support, and of course that's when it fell. But the analyst, the engineering firm, also said the concrete plastic mix was not a factor. So in the spring of '72, we're going to take another attempt at it. The city says the bridge will rise again with design improvements, but of course we have to have another plastic bottle collection drive, and it's scheduled. The second bridge is better designed. It has a stronger support system. It's got the same plastic concrete mix. It's no charge to the city, by the way, and another plastic bottle drive is done. But the second bridge does not come without its snags. A sudden rain ruined some freshly poured concrete and had to be removed. And then there was other concrete that had to be removed because a contaminant accidentally was mixed in. A purple gummy residue would come up out of the concrete and set up on the surface as the concrete was hardening. Some of it can be washed off, but other stains are just embedded into the concrete. Large portions of the concrete had to be jackhammered off. Ultimately, the purple gummy gooey substance was determined to have come from some rogue plastic scrap bottles that came out of the ECC plastics lab. Those bottles had contained formaldehyde, and the students who were doing the grinding apparently had run out of bottles to be ground. They thought they needed some more flakes. They looked around the lab to find what empty bottles they might find, and they grabbed these empty formaldehyde bottles, but the residue in there apparently had a reaction with the concrete and created the gummy goo. Now, the city kept all this jackhammering very quiet. After the embarrassment they had the year before, they really didn't want the city and the populace to know that they lost concrete because of rain, and they lost concrete because of the purple goo. But it all gets done, and we move into the 1980s now with the city and the island, what I call treading water. Fast forward to the summer of 1980, young people again, Elgin's young people are again volunteering to help clean up the island. The city mows and picks up some litter, but it's the volunteers who are clearing brush, trimming trees, repairing brick pathways, once again trying to get the island opened back up. By November of 1980, the old connector bridge between the islands, the one built by the Izaak Walton League back in the 30s, is in total disrepair, as you can see right now on the screen. And through the 1980s, the Courier runs pictures of people walking on the island and enjoying the island and fishing. And here's, of course, a picture of the repaired Izaak Walton Connector Bridge. Now, in April of 1988, due to heavy currents, the island is slowly disappearing again. The Elgin Beautification Commission says that Walton Island should be a #1 priority because of anticipated heavy bike path use. In the end, the bike path will be the savior of Walton Island. We should know by now that this is the Fox River bike path, runs the length of the river in the county. At this point in the 80s, it's working its way south along the river from Dundee, and it is going to, of course, reach Elgin pretty soon. 1988, Ross Ricks, the parks director, says he's reluctant to let the area go any further. It's become a haven for vagrants and alcoholics. It's unusable after dark. He does consider the island a high priority. In April of '89, Elgin's optimistic about getting some state money for the riverfront bike path. In fact, they've asked the State Conservation Fund for $189,500 for the project. And the leadership is asking the city council for $100,000 to upgrade the island. And this really will be about the first time the city spends any significant money on the island. And here we are 100 years after we first started talking about the island. In October of 1989, the Parks Department and Elgin Proud and Beautiful and the Izaak Walton League and others team up for a cleanup. Brush is cleared. Stumps near the water are left in place as a reason for erosion control. Again, still largely volunteered by the civic population. So in the 1990s, the bike path spurs interest, but as we'll see, the city fathers are still pretty hesitant. The city begins a major riverfront restoration in 1990. A $66,000 grant from Kane County is acquired to help with shoreline stabilization, path reconstruction, wildlife habitat. By May of 1992, the city officials agree that the river and islands are a neglected showcase. River planning henceforward will mesh with the city center master plan. And now some wild plans are proposed. May of '92, someone suggests that the bridges should be actually underwater glass enclosed bridges. Life-size storybook characters should be on the island. A giant xylophone should be built. There'll be an art wall, a music wall, some other wild plans. A more sedate plan suggested the island should be kept as a natural area with just interpretive signs. But really, the first steps are being taken to stabilize the shoreline. Now, by November of '92, the bike path has worked its way down to Slade Avenue, and it is creating some major energy for Walton Island redevelopment. In January of '93, it's thought that it might cost between $1 and $2.5 million to fix up the island. The city thinks it'll seek some federal money, grant money, but is warning the public it may take 5 or 10 or 20 years to complete. The biggest expenses are shoreline stabilization and, of course, the bridges. But the thought is we need to make Walton Island fit in with the Civic Center and the nearby library. But we have doubters. In January of '93, Councilwoman Marie Yearman says, "That's some big bucks. I'd like to see it done, but I think it's very expensive." In August of '93, Councilwoman Cheryl Popple says, "How much money do we want to spend on that island? I think we need to reassess what we're doing unless the majority of you are willing to spend $1.5 million on the island." And as late as November of '93, Councilman John McKevick says, "I can understand how the island might have been appealing at the time, but I believe Walton Island has lost its charm since." But yet we do move forward now. There is some energy at the city government level, and of course there's always been energy with the populace. So in August of 1993, the city purchases some prefab bridges with the Kane County grant money. Deborah Nyer, an assistant to the city manager, says, "You know, you fill that with activity, you patrol it, you maintain it. That's going to be a very uncomfortable place for transients." By December of 1995, Councilman Schock is on board. None of the potential can be realized until we restore that area to a usable condition. I've seen towns capitalize on river walks, and those towns don't have islands. In June of '97, the council votes 4-3 to spend $716,000 for bridge installation and erosion control. This is the first serious expenditure done by the city on the islands. By September of '97, more repairs are underway, dead tree removal. We've installed the 3 bridges. That's a shoreline bridge to the North Island, a shoreline bridge to the South Island, and a new connector bridge between the islands. And And those are, of course, the bridges you see there today. There's a real desire to make Elgin's riverfront look like Naperville's Riverwalk, and the new bridges are handicap accessible, and quite importantly, they are police car accessible also. They're designed to allow a police car to drive on them. So in June of 1999, there's a small celebration to mark the rededication of the island and the riverfront. A final price tag of $890,000 and 8 years of work. The shoreline has been stabilized, walking paths installed, bridges bought and installed, electric lighting, trees removed, brush cleared, new trees planted, and grass seeded. In June 1999, at the island dedication, now Mayor Ed Schock says, "When I look around the river and see people enjoying the island, it should bring a tremendous amount of satisfaction to everyone involved." But the story's not quite over yet. As we roll into the 2000s, I've titled this section, Money Meets Motivation, Full Speed Ahead. June of 2001, work is now beginning on a $5.2 million plan for the riverfront that will include an overlook at the dam, the Pioneer Memorial, shoreline improvements by the Civic Center and the island. On the island, $1.23 million will be dedicated to doing things such as removing the old bridge, the Larkin High Bridge. It's no longer needed. A new flag statue is proposed. A pavilion will be built. The brick walkways will be enhanced. More landscaping, benches, lighting, public art. And of course, on this slide, I've got a picture of the Pioneer Memorial. All of you should know that that is along Kimball Street at the bridge, really overlooking the island. That memorial was designed by Trygve Rovelstad, the sculptor of the original flag. Trygve Rovelstad never lived to see his clay model turned into a bronze statue. But I think it's somewhat fitting that those pioneers, as they're looking forward and beside, are actually looking down pretty much where the Trygve Rovelstad flag was. So I think that completes a nice circle. March of 2002, the Daily Herald reports that money is coming from the city and from the state, from the county, from the riverboat, from the Forest Preserve District. Private citizens, including families like the Zieglers and the Siegels and the Shales, are donating money. Being sold to the public are paver bricks, like we saw in an earlier slide, for $50. Benches are being sold for $500. And if you really wanted to, you could buy a pedestrian light pole for $1,000. And of course, we're going to have a groundbreaking. And at the groundbreaking, we have to have something of a celebration. And so the groundbreaking pavilion rolls around in June 2001. Ray Moeller, the Elgin Economic Director, says, 10 years from now, you won't even know this place. And at that same groundbreaking, Mayor Ed Schock says, I think we have community awareness and community supports this, and we have the money now. That always helps. I would say to Mayor Schock, you always had community support down through the years, but of course you're right, the money helps. One of the other things completed this time is the Elgin Firefighter Memorial. It's installed on the east bank near the dam. It commemorates Captain Stanley Balsas and Elgin firefighter Michael Whalen, who lost their lives below the dam, caught in the boil, while trying to save a man who had carelessly rafted over the dam. In an odd circumstance, the rafter was saved, but the two firemen drowned, and that was in 1974. In July of 2000, Elgin sculptor Dave Powers proposes a 7,000-pound, 20-foot tall American flag sculpture for the north end of the island. Cost is estimated at $150,000. Says Dave Powers, the flag will represent a ragtag group of immigrants who believed in this idea, freedom. And the flag will be installed and it will be dedicated on Flag Day 2002 with 100 people present. Jessica Hayes, Larkin High School graduate, sings America the Beautiful, and you're a grand old flag. Of course, we're going to have another dedication as the island work is done. And so Mayor Schock is present, and he says Elgin's past, present, and future will always be linked to the Fox River. And Jack Shales, an Elgin philanthropist, says, people know if we don't use it, we'll lose it. Interesting note, the island has been the location for a number of weddings in the gazebo at the island. The first couple to marry on the island did so in March of 2003. The couple was Sarah Fabre, an Elgin High School graduate of 1996, and she married Brett Mahan, a Larkin High School graduate, also of 96. According to the paper, the couple had intended a destination wedding in Tahiti, but somehow they wound up in the Walton Island gazebo. Not quite sure how that worked out, but I think this is a wonderful metaphor for Elgin. Where else in Elgin can an Elgin High grad marry a Larkin High grad except in the neutral waters around Walton Island in the middle of the river? It's absolutely fitting. As we close here, I've included a few pictures of Walton Island underwater. We have to remember that as much as that island has been built up, it can still be the victim of an angry Fox River, and from time to time, it's totally unusable. I noticed this spring alone, it was pretty much underwater. So in closing, I have a final thought. In June of 2007, the American Institute of Architecture was celebrating its 150th anniversary. And the Illinois chapter members decided to list the 150 greatest architectural sites in Illinois. And the Elgin Riverfront and Walton Island were included. The sites had to be a designed place, and they had to be accessible to the public. I think it's cool that the Elgin Riverfront was included. And my real final closing thought is Jack Shales' dedication words are still relevant. People know that if we don't use it, we'll lose it. Thank you very much for tuning in. Thank you very much for the Gale Borden Public Library for partnering with the Elgin History Museum, and we hope to share some more stories with you in the future. Webinar's not broadcasting at all. Well, I don't know what I did or didn't do there. I clicked on lots of things. I didn't time it. How long did we go?